Black therapist. I am here with my amazing people on the planet. I'm here with Miss Tanya Logan and Miss Vanetta Anacom. Amazing, dope clinicians, amazing mothers. Good evening, ladies. How are you doing?
Doing
Good
well, thank you.
Well, I call you amazing. I just want people to know something about you before we begin this discussion. Um, Tanya, can you tell us something about you? And then Vanetta, I want you to share some things about you if you have anything you want to advertise or mention.
hmm Tanya Logan. I'm a clinical social worker. I've been doing this for 31 years. I currently provide therapy full time, and I have a book that's out. It's called Mommy's Bright Sunshine, and it can be found on Amazon.
Oh, nice. Wonderful. So for those who didn't hear it, it's called Mommy's Bright Sunshine on
Correct.
Amazon.
Yes.
Wonderful. What's the book about? Just tell us a little bit about what the book's about.
Yeah, so it's about moving beyond trials, tragedy, and trauma because my first daughter is actually deceased. And so I talk about my testimony in my book.
Oh, wonderful. We have to have
awesome.
you back on.
Awesome.
hmm
Awesome. And Miss Vanetta.
Yes. Hi. Good afternoon. My name is Vanetta Nocum. I am an adoptive parent, foster parent as well. And I adopted two children, and I'm just happy to be an adopted their family.
Awesome. Awesome. So ladies, let's dive in. Um, this is a topic that's near and dear to all of our hearts,
hmm
because we've worked with individuals that have been in the system. We've worked with adults who've been in the system, and
hmm
we are also mothers who met our children through the system. And one of the things I remember us talking last year was about on this topic. I think it's the only family experience where, in order to have family and have a life, there has to be a death or a loss. And I wanted
hmm
us to talk about, the losses and the trauma that are connected with the experience of foster care and adoption, and some of the things that happen in the adoption or foster care experience that transforms people, and then what it's like to be a parent of someone who um, you adopted through the system, and some of the challenges and some of the blessings that come with having a child who biologically is not your child, but who through your heart,
hmm
that's your baby all day long. Right. So, what is your earliest experience professionally working with people who've been through foster care and adoption? What has that experience been like? And has there been part of trauma with that? Um, Anyone can answer it.
I'll speak on that. I was a case aide for 15 years and working with foster children that are coming to the system for foster or either adoption. Um, it was very rewarding. Um, I've always said that if it wasn't for foster care, who knows where our children would be up today. Um, it was a rewarding job because you see children grow up and you see that you have made a awesome impact on their lives. Even now, I see children that I've seen that I was part of their life when they were small and now they're adults. They're like, remember me? Some of them I do and some of them I don't because I dealt with so many children. Also, the same with parents. A lot of parents, you have to, you see parents, the biggest thing in the hurtness thing is having to give your children up,
Mm,
no matter what the circumstances is, every mother feels that they're a good mother and having to even make that decision to say, you know what, somebody can do better than me is a hard decision to make. So in that, we have to be sympathetic to the birth mother.
mhm.
Understand that she may have different situations. That's no really cause of her own. The reason why her children may have it come into this.
Thank you for talking about the trauma from the mother's perspective.
hmm
What about the trauma from the father's perspective? Because there are some men who will say, I didn't give up my rights. I
hmm
didn't know that I had a child, or family members who feel traumatized because there's a child that's been taken from their family that they didn't know about, and they didn't have the right to say, hey, I want to still stay connected.
Yeah, I can also speak to that. And I did neglect to mention that my daughter is also adopted. So I do know from a professional as well as personal standpoint. But regarding the fathers, before a child can be adopted, we had to make every effort to locate the biological father and give him the opportunity to develop a relationship with the child, or to raise the child and parent the child on his own. If he realizes that he is not able to do that, then he can relinquish his parental rights, or um, the court could terminate rights of either the mother or the father if needed, so that the child can be placed in a permanent, stable home environment.
Would you describe that, is that experience of termination, is that traumatic for the parents normally? Like I think Vanessa said
Absolutely.
something. Absolutely. Can you talk about
Yes.
that? Because
Sure.
people think it's so easy.
Right. So terminating parental rights is kind of the last step to make the child legally free for adoption. So if let's say that the child is in a foster home, and I did foster care work for 25 years. If the child is in a foster home, their foster parents want to adopt, then the biological parents can consent to an adoption, meaning that they agree to relinquish their parental rights as long as this particular family adopts their child. Biological parents also could just outright relinquish their parental rights, meaning that anyone who is interested in the child could then adopt that particular child. And then the third option, again, is if parents are not able to raise their child but aren't willing to voluntarily make a plan, then the court can terminate their rights. So, yes, it can be very
Traumatic.
traumatic, because then they have less control in the legal situation.
Yeah. Vanessa, did you want to say something about that?
Basically, I wanted to say I as well adopted two children. Um, and as Tanya had indicated, it is very traumatic because there's a loss on both ends. Parents have a loss as well as the child. have
We can't hear you that well. Something's going with your audio.
A lot of people don't understand that the child has a loss as well. That child
Right.
has
Yeah,
a traumatic loss.
absolutely. And I think that's the part that gets downplayed. Like I had a picture when I was advertising, and it said, this child said, I think 928 days I was put in the system, and today I'm adopted. I'm like, ooh, I
Mm-hmm.
can't remember what I did 928 days ago. So
Right.
just looking at that caption on the outside, like, wow, that's great. But can you imagine what? And this wasn't a baby. This was a kid who may have been 6 or 7. Can you
Mm-hmm.
imagine the separation that happens for that child, and
Right.
them having them counting each day that they're in the system, waiting for someone to pick them? But also, I like what you're saying about from a parental or even a guardian standpoint. Sometimes we're not ready to let go, but we're
Mm-hmm.
not able to parent that person, but we're not able to let go. And it feels
Right.
like that movie Raising Isaiah. Remember that movie Raising Isaiah
Yep.
with
Mm-hmm.
where she wasn't ready to let go, and it wasn't about race. It was about, I want to be his mother, and then at the end she realized she wasn't his mother anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
she did everything possible. Well, you gonna say something that that's traumatic? We can't hear you, Bennett. I think there's something going with your audio.
Well, while Vanetta is getting her audio straight, I can say that, as she did state, that with adoption, people are very happy. We're bringing, this child into the family, and that's a positive thing. But for adoption to occur, a loss did have to occur. So children were removed from their biological family, or the biological family made a plan. Um, and so often children may feel a sense of abandonment, which my daughter, quite frankly, still does, even at 25. And she came to me when she was 7 months old. Um, but still, knows that she was not born to me. So that is a different, I've always said that foster care and adoption is its own culture, because I can tell someone from a textbook kind of about not being raised by biological family members, but I certainly don't know it firsthand. So that's why I do
Mm.
believe it's its own culture.
Absolutely. And
I
I
do,
think
I do apologize with the audio saying. Can you all hear me
oh,
now?
it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. It might be partisan, but we can hear you now. Did you want to say something?
I basically wanted to piggyback off of Tanya. I My son now is 24, and he just got married last year, and we talked about it like after his wedding. He discussed to me, about the loss, and he had the opportunity to meet his birth mother. I had adopted him, and he was
Mhm.
on so so it was a loss that a boy, and still he had the opportunity at his wedding for both of us to meet his birth mom and me to meet again. And it was a real funny feeling. But like you said, it's a loss. But she did let me know that she did appreciate, that um the
Mm.
feel that I was able to adopt him and he grew up to be the man he is today. So she did thank me later.
Oh, that's awesome. So she had an appreciation for
Yes.
you raising
Yeah.
this child you
That's
have
great.
together. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. That is
Yes.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is the if there had to be a happily ever after story, that's the experience that we all want. Where they have
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
ending and introduction that
Because it wasn't like that really. At the court, it wasn't like that at all. So at the wedding, I didn't know what I was up against. I was a little nervous because I didn't know what I was up against. But she was able to, understand and to see
mm,
her son. So she really did. She thanked me for the idea of being able to raise him and him being the man that he is today. So when they had the first dance, we both danced together with him for the first time.
wow.
That's beautiful.
That is beautiful. I want to say thank you because people don't realize I know that I fought for my son,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it wasn't like in the movies where it's like, okay, I see that's my baby, and the next moment he's mine.
Yeah.
No, there's a whole legal process that
Right.
takes sometimes a year or maybe even longer, depending upon if both parents have signed off on those rights. And
Mm-hmm.
even if the person's not able to raise them, they still want access to them. and
Yes.
and sometimes it's fine when you co-parenting and you agree to make the visitations. But I know that I was mom. I was like, I want my son. I want him to have contact with you when he's old enough. But I want my son, and it was a fight because she
Mm-hmm.
wasn't ready, but she wasn't able to raise him or his siblings.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that one day that he could have that meeting with her and him, and
Yeah.
that there could be awareness. I think every part of the trauma, I think that Tanya mentioned, is that every child wonders, like, why?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why that you said it's a culture that's different like any other.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You
Mm-hmm.
see more of that. And is it basically that everyone wonders why I was given up, or who do I look like, or is that
Yes.
loss?
Yes. And it was another thing, Tanya, Candace, I'd like to mention is with my daughter, she lost her biological brother, which they had visits, even after they were adopted. I continued the visitation. Her brother passed away a couple years ago, and she
Oh,
had
I
me
didn't know.
to the funeral. And it was so, I was able to reconnect with her birth mom and family, her extended family on her mother's side. And everyone was glad to see the development and how she's matured. And now she has children. And, how the children it's like a big extended family.
Wow, that's awesome. So you really are having these really great connected experiences with the full circle.
Yes, yes. And it's not always been that way, but time brings about a change. Yeah, time.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
It was
yeah.
a roller coaster ride for not so much for my daughter, but for my son, because as time had mentioned before, you know, um, it was one day you think, okay, the adoption's going smooth, and then the next day, oh no, there's a family member to come up and someone's come
Mm-hmm.
out, or there's a father that that we didn't explore to see if he was, biological father. So even as a foster parent to adopt, you have that emotional roller coaster ride, and you built that bond with them. Both of my children were young, 2 weeks and 6 months, for each one of them. One was 2 weeks and the other was 6 months. So you, as a parent, is still constantly, bonding with that child because it's a baby. You're doing for them and stuff, and then you never know. And is this child going to eventually be mine, or is this child going back to the birth family? And I may not even get
Mm.
the child.
But you're speaking about a whole nother level of trauma for the
Right,
parents who are either the foster care parents who want to adopt or the parents who are in the process, not
Mm-hmm.
knowing, like not just the children not knowing if they can stay with the foster care parents or they adopted, but the people who are adopting also having that traumatic experience of not knowing what's going to happen next and being on a
right,
roller coaster with the child.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Can either one of you talk a little bit more about that? Because I know that their parents were, it was difficult for me
Mm-hmm.
not knowing who's going to
And,
pop up next.
and I think one of the things as well is my big thing was making sure as that child grew up to let the, I mean, I always told my children that God gave you a second chance on life, and I also, tried to make sure that there was some bond if possible, if I did have the information of the birth mom or the birth family. If it was not traumatic for the child, we have to protect their feelings and stuff. To at least have bond with their brothers and sisters, because nothing's any worse than growing up not knowing your brother and sister biological and marrying them and not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
But
So the unknown piece is a part of the traumatic experience, not knowing who I'm connected to.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Do you think that, I know that for me, that became more pronounced as my child got older. And as you get older, you start looking like parents and
Mm-hmm.
right,
taking on traits.
Mm-hmm.
And then that curiosity, like, wow, I don't quite look like them and I'm different from them. And that wonderment of who do I look like? Where do I get these mannerisms? Where do I get this smile from? Did you feel that played a part as well for you?
Well, I can say with my daughter, certainly I couldn't, because I never met any of her biological family members. But what I tried to do is make connections to the biological family. Because, for instance, I think that I'm creative, but my daughter is extremely artistic. And so I would say that you must have gotten that from your biological family. So I can't talk about the physical characteristics, but some of her interests, could have stemmed from her biological family. And when you were talking about the trauma with placement, when I started doing this work back in 1991, there were children placed in homes that were not legally free, meaning that they were still connected legally to their biological family members who could then come back and try to work to have the child returned to them. So now, um, children typically are not placed in adoptive homes through the foster care system unless they're legally free. Now, if somebody
Mm.
makes an independent arrangement, through an attorney and not through the foster care system, that may be a different experience. But in order to protect the child as well as the foster family from, any disruptions, often they have already, filed the adoption petition. The parental rights have been terminated, so it's really more formality to go through the process.
Okay. So that protects the heart from everyone.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. One of the things we that was in the title of today's discussion was about the attachment piece.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the experience of being in foster care and the experience of being adopted disrupts the attachment process that happens between parent, guardian, and child? Do you think the disruption in the biological connection causes that child sometimes to have attachment issues, bonding issues, safety issues, or security issues?
I mean, I think, from a professional standpoint, I think Vanetta can answer more from personal, because again, my daughter came to me when she was 5 months old. But in foster care, often children are moved frequently from one home to another home. And so they do have some trust issues and difficulty perhaps attaching, because often parents will say, this is your forever home. Then something happens, the placement disrupts. And so when they hear that again in the next home, why should they believe that? However, I do feel that once children have, stability, really people who are committed to them, then they can overcome some of that trauma and therefore attachment issues. And certainly if someone moves to make the child permanently, legally theirs through adoption, that helps to reinforce that these people are committed, for the rest of the child's life.
Mm. Were you going to
And I
say something, Heather?
will say that, as Tanya said, being a case aide and talking to children, like I said, some of them I still have communicate with, and that is exactly what they said. They said, going from foster home to foster home. Oh, okay, you're going to be here, and as you said, something happened, or even a disruption, caused at home and the household where they have to move. They lose a lot. They have a lot of trust issues. I had seen one of the had, as a client, and she's now an adult. She has a couple of children, and she was saying that it's hard for her to trust, even with relationship with his father, because promises were made
Mm.
so much. Till now, she feels like that she can't trust anybody. And that was one of the reasons she said that she had children early, because she wanted to have something that she could hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So she wanted to have children so she could have someone who belonged to her, who she can connect to.
Right,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. I resonate with both of you because I think that if there's stability that's there, especially early on, it
Mm-hmm.
connects with that part of that wants to co-regulate, that wants to connect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're born of connection, the sperm and the egg, I always say. So
Mm-hmm.
if you have stability early in life, it helps do maybe some of that repair to that attachment piece with the bio parent. But then there are people who stay in the system and who are
Right.
always being moved or being violated, and
right,
their guard is up. And sometimes it's hard, so they create attachments through the womb, right? Or they create attachments with people who they think they came from, right? Or they
Well,
create attachments with people who resonate with them, who just
right.
unconditionally.
And that's why I was actually, I mean, I know that Vanetta's children were placed early on as well. I was actually thinking about her experience with their biological family members, because I have not had that experience with my daughter. And um, did that help the your children to maybe manage some of the trauma that they had experienced by, laying
well,
eyes on their biological relatives?
with my son, not so much with my daughter. My daughter, even though she had her biological mother at a young age, but then she drifted away from her as she got older. But with my son, once he connected with his mom 2 years ago, and he remembered the visits, and I had pictures also of the visits with his biological brothers. And now he's connected and bonded with him. And it was so ironic because he has a brother that's 10 years older than
Mm,
the
Wow.
visit. He was a baby. My son was a baby, but his brother was old enough to remember. And he was discussing even at the wedding certain things. Remember when we had a visit here, we had a visit there, and we were to share some of the pictures of them. So having that family life book is very
That's
important.
huge.
mhm.
And I'd
Mm.
like to, a lot of people, viewers may not know what a family life book is. I'd like to explain it. Um, when you to be able to be a foster parent, you have to attend foster parent classes and discuss what a life book is. A life book is basically that child's life. It's all wrapped up in a book, so they can look back on, of their maybe if you have pictures of their birth mother, if you have pictures of their birth father, if you have pictures of siblings, from home to home. So it's a book, basically a picture album book. It can be, or different things that child involves that child, that the child can look back on and can relate to as he gets older. Where I came from. I
Mm.
even have my children's, they have a life bag, and it's the outfit that I brought them home even from when I first got it.
Mhm.
So, it's really funny because my son, now that he's married, he, chose his children. This is what I had. And they look at him like, you didn't wear that. That's too little. But it's part of them, whether it's their
Yeah,
story, whether it's good or bad. That
yeah,
story is important.
yeah. That's important. It's interesting. I too have a book, and it has in all his pictures in it from the time that I met him, because I met my son when he was 3 or 4 months. Right, but we didn't have custody of him until maybe about a year, a little bit over a year. But from the time I met him at a barbecue to the time that he was maybe 4 or 5, he has his own book. And within that, like you, I've kept information about what I do know about the biological parents, so that when he becomes at a point in his life where he wants to go find them, I'm like, okay, I had him. We've had that talk. Like, if you want to find them,
Mm-hmm.
this is their information. I even found them on Facebook recently. I was like, oh, this is who they are. If you want to find them, that's fine, because that attachment to their biological, their ancestral part is important for a lot of them. They
It
want to
is.
know who, and you can't explain why, like why there was a disruption, why they weren't able to take care of them, because some of them wanted them, but they
Mm-hmm.
can't explain why they weren't in a place in their lives where they couldn't keep them, where they couldn't make a home for them.
And it's really ironic with my son is when he met his mother and some of the stories she told him, like Tanya was saying, he has that bond attachment. My son, when he was little, and I used to hold him in my arms up on my shoulder, he would twist the back of my hair and go to sleep. And we couldn't understand why. But we were mentioning it to his mom at the reception, and his mom says, I've always loved hair, and I've been a beautician all my life. And that
Oh,
just bond
wow.
him enjoying hair. You know what I mean? Just him being that was what soothed, you know, that connection.
Mm.
So,
That those pieces.
right. And also, even with my daughter, with my grandchildren, it's so funny because now I try to teach them, they're at the age that, relation. This is your mother. I'm your mother's mother. I'm your, I'm your mother is my daughter, your uncle is my son, and they were babies, and just showing them pictures. It's hard for them to be like, well, they were babies once, and that connection, even with grandchildren, to be able to relate back to them.
Yeah, to look at the lineage.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
even grandson said, well, he calls me Gigi. Gigi, do you have pictures of when you had mommy in your stomach? So I'm having to explain to him, you know,
Oh, wow.
so,
Mm-hmm.
That brings us to another question about having to what is that like to explain to the grandchildren, and at what age did you explain to your children, right, that they were not biologically related, but they were heart related? What age, and how did you do that?
Well, with me, I had a welcome home party, and again, she was 5 months old. So we, talked about adoption from the very beginning. Of course, she didn't understand the word, but it was about her being comfortable with the word and those around us being comfortable. So my daughter can never recall when I sort of sat down and told her that she was adopted. It's just been part of her story, part of her
yeah,
journey.
Yeah.
same here, the same here. I mean, I've always been open. I've always, and they'll come and say, well, where is my mom? And, I've always been honest with them, and
Yeah.
I've always reassured them that, that they were my pride and joy as well. And, God gave them a second chance of life. Because sometimes they get bitter, like, well, was I not good enough? They have all these questions. Well, why
Yeah,
did me and kept my siblings? And I always reassured them that God gave them a second chance.
absolutely. And that's the beauty of it, right? I know that we had I think Tanya would help me do this. We had created a story when he was little, which is, God, one day God woke me up. I think I created the story. God
Mm.
woke me up, and so my baby was there, and I kept looking in my belly. The baby wasn't there, and God told me it was somewhere in my life, and I kept looking for the baby, and the baby wasn't there. And then God, one day I went to my mother-in-law's house, and there was my baby. The baby must have been put in someone else's tummy, and that baby knew it was for me, and it was right then. I loved that baby, and as he got older, we would change the story and add some things to it. And he was like, "Tell me
Mhm.
again, whose house was that?" Right.
Okay.
And that was significant. And I remember us thinking, we're not gonna really add too much information until he gets to be older. And then I
Right.
remember something happened. He was in school, and the school counselor was like, you ever thought about just telling him? And I was like, no, I don't want to tell him. And she brought it up about adoption, and we were like, and and then we added to the story. But I
Mhm.
remember him saying recently as an adult was he said, wow, I wish that he said I can remember that moment. And for him that was traumatic. He was like, I remember that, thinking, what? What about the story about the lady? Because for child's mind doesn't make that connection because we had
Mhm.
never used, like you said, Tom, we had never used that word adoption. We talked about baby, you're my baby, never used it in someone else's stomach. But that word is important to introduce, take the power, the charge away from it.
Mhm.
And I know that for some people, I remember Run DMC, I forgot the name of the rapper, but who had found out late adolescence that he was adopted. And it just shattered him because he had
Mhm.
never heard the word. And people in the family knew, except he didn't know.
Mhm.
And I think how you introduce something is important. And I think we were together before. I remember saying, we just, everyone in the family knew, and we assumed because we have two other children, and they didn't know until a year ago, maybe a year,
Oh.
2 years ago,
Wow.
because they were looking through the baby book, and they were like, "Where's a picture of him in your stomach?" We were like, "Oh no, he," and they were like, "We didn't what?" But
Mhm.
it was just such an assumption that they knew, they never knew
And
because they
see,
never, yeah.
that's what was with me as well. I'm originally from Missouri, and so going home each year and having that relationship, my family that I was, foster parent into adopting the children, but um, it was so strange for even like their cousins and stuff. They were like, "So you didn't carry they were adopted." Because I mean, it's something that you may share with your immediate family, but then down the line, third and fourth cousins, they just assume, what, they start to look like you. As it says, your feet are
Mhm.
long,
Yeah,
start
yeah,
like.
yeah, yeah. And people will look for similarities. Like when some people meet my oldest, they think looks just for my husband. People will look for similarities, and there are some similarities. Because sometimes the children start looking like us, have their mannerisms, and they really are our children. We don't see the
Right.
separation. Yeah. For
Right.
And then
those,
also the rewarding is now that both of my children are grown. My daughter's 30 and my son soon be he just turned 25. One of the things is um, the stuff that you instill in them. They come back and remind you of it. Like my children, I took to church. My son, after he got married, he was like, "Mom, it just seemed like I had a missing link," and he said it was because I did continue praying and being into the Lord. He said, "Now um, I'm really into gospel," and he says, "On my way to work in the morning, I pray and stuff." He said, "Because I remember going to work and you're praying and it's like it's a rewarding feeling because you like just when you think they're not watching, it's when they're watching."
Right.
look at that. That is love. What advice do you have for people who didn't go through the adoption experience and went through the foster care experience and are having difficulty with those attachments because there wasn't someone like us or a guardian or someone to step in to make those attachments to create stabilization and safety for them? What are some things that you would suggest, or clinically or even as a mother, what are some things you would say to them?
Well, I would always recommend getting professional help if warranted. There are people specialized with adoption therapy, or it could just be mental health therapy if the child is experiencing, like we talked about, trauma or uh, uh, attachment issues. And the trauma could be because not from being adopted, but children that enter the foster care system have often been traumatized, so much so
Mhm.
that they needed to be placed into the foster care system. Excuse me. So having ongoing family therapy as well, so that families can understand the child and the child's behaviors. Because if the child is having an issue, it's really a family issue. It's not just fix the child and then the family will be fixed. um, I think certainly always listening to your child, and child could be any age, even your adult children, listening openly and non-judgmentally, because we can't help to address issues if we don't know what the issues are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Bernetta, were you going to say something?
No, I basically agree with what Tanya said because a lot of times kids just want to be heard, even as adults, they want to be heard. Because
Mhm.
sometimes it was really hard for me because I always thought, okay, I work with children and the line of children. I was case safe, so I know a lot, but you never know. I had my daughter one time. She says, "It's not you gave me everything, but sometimes I just wanted to be heard. You gave me love and stuff, but sometimes I just want to hear I love you."
Yeah. For I just want to say for those people who didn't have the experience that our children were fortunate to have, is to let them know that they're enough, and that
Mhm.
family is not just who you were born to and who are adopted to. Family could be the people who you've created with, who are connected with, friends. It could
Mhm.
be church people. It could be sorority people. It could be different organizations. It could even be the people at your job who
Yeah.
step in, who check in with you, who talk with you. Because sometimes, if you've been to the foster care system because of trauma, sometimes you can get re-traumatized in the
Mhm.
system. And a lot of times people get into the foster care system, especially people of color. We make up 34% of foster care, but we're only 12% of the population. And people don't realize we make that up because of sometimes systemic racism, poverty issues, a lot of other issues that come with our culture.
Mhm.
Um, so letting people know that sometimes it's not that you weren't wanted; it's just that the person has so many systemic things that were against them, they couldn't create a life for you that was
Right.
loving and supportive. And that healing is possible, especially if you've been violated, abused, sexually abused, physically abused, neglected in the
Mhm.
system. Because you can be adopted and still have those experiences, and
Absolutely.
someone keeps you for a check, real talk. Right, which is why I like the fact they've changed the system now so that in order to adopt people, or I think the foster care people, you got to show that you are financially solvent, that you've got to be
Mhm.
sound, that this is not you chasing the check. But for those
Right.
who didn't have that stability, to know that you can recreate what you have and make sure that you don't repeat the cycles that you came from. Because sometimes people who didn't have healthy attachments will push people away. They pull, I want connection, I don't want connection, right? Or they look for
Right.
chaos because it's what they're used to.
Right.
And peace is out there and healing is out there. And seeing someone who specializes in adoption issues or trauma issues is a good choice in the beginning of the healing process.
Mhm.
A lot of times, children feel like they're alone, and it's very important that, like my daughter has a lot of separation, and when I reassured her that we have bonded together and that it's a family thing, we can go into professional therapy together. You know, with someone that you trust, someone that that you understand. You're not alone. A lot of children feel like I have to go into this alone. Nobody's doing anything. So having that support of, okay, let's do this
Yeah,
together, not alone.
that's important that they're not alone and that they don't have to test and keep testing and retesting the people who are right there in front of you.
Right.
Right?
Mhm.
So that's part of that disorganized attachment where we retest, right? Or we're clean and we hold on to people, not realizing I'm not going anywhere. You can let go. I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
So you ladies have been amazing. Um, I appreciate your time. I want to ask Tanya to say the book again so they can find the book.
Thank you, Candace. It's Mommy's Bright Sunshine. And mommy is Mommie, just FYI, but Mommy's Bright Sunshine, and it can be found on Amazon.
Awesome, awesome. And Miss Vanetta, thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to let the people know?
No, I just want people to know that don't give up. It's a rough ride sometimes, and it's rewarding. And we can't
Mhm.
give parents didn't give up on us. So we need more parents that are more foster parents or adoptive parents to come in and step up. There's a lot of children out here of all age. A lot of people want babies, but we have teenagers out here that just needs love and attention as well.
Mhm.
We need that attachment
Yes.
because
Thank
that
you
can
for
change a
that.
whole generation,
Yes.
right? And this is about healing a whole generation and ending that cycle of detachment and despair. So thank you, ladies. For those who are looking
Thank
for me, you can find this video on Dope Black Therapist on YouTube. I'm going to be in California, November 3rd and the 4th. Um,
Okay.
Doing a workshop on polyvagal theory applied to BIPOC communities and trauma healing. You can get tickets. It's now going to be live online at Be Well Play University. So I'm sorry, it's Well Play University is where you can buy the tickets. Good night, everyone. Take care. Thank you,
Good
ladies.
night.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.